I really meant to do a 1-year review of this Efnote 5 drum set earlier in the year, and it's been on my to-do list since February, which was my 1-year anniversary of playing these drums. But then life happened and I got busy, and now it's pretty much the end of June. But better late than never, right? I got this kit last year in February of 2024, and shortly after that I posted a video about my first impressions of using it for about a month. I'll link that video over here in case you want to check it out, but for now, let's see how these drums have held up after a year and about 4 months of playing. In terms of triggering, there is pretty much no wear and tear whatsoever. Everything works and sounds exactly as good as it did the first day I plugged it in. Bear in mind that my use case for this drum set is teaching and a bit of practicing. This is not my main kit because I do have acoustic drums. When I teach lessons, I teach on this kit and my students use my acoustic drums. So I don't really use it very hard. It's not super hard playing, but I do use it frequently, at least 5 times a week for teaching, as well as some of my own personal practice for after hours kind of playing when I don't want to disturb anyone. That being said, the only signs of wear and tear are super minor cosmetic things. So I think on the camera you can kind of see the hi-hat. There's this sort of lighter ring of whitish color. Yeah, that's stick marks. And these are the most mild stick marks you'll ever see. I'll put in some close-up views of the cymbals and you can see that it's such a subtle kind of stick mark on these gray silicone, I guess, or silicone or rubber coatings on the cymbals. They do say that they made it to be stick mark resistant, and honestly, that's very true after a year of playing on them, and you can barely see any stick marks. A lot of other electronic drums, you will, like after the first time playing it, you're gonna see all your stick marks on the cymbal. And it also helps that these are 360-degree triggering cymbals, so that's why my hi-hats have this white rim around them quite evenly, because it usually spins while you play it. And that also means your wear and tear gets distributed evenly on the cymbal. Whereas if you're playing a pad that stays in place because the trigger is only on the front side or something like that, it's going to get more wear in that area. But that said, it's really just cosmetic. If we talk about the pads, you can see very, very slight yellow spotting on it. Probably a little bit more over here where I rest my hand to do cross sticks because I have horrifically sweaty palms. But honestly, you have to squint to see it. This yellowing is probably because my country is really humid. And so that just happens to materials when you keep them too long. If you look at the bass drum, yes, there's some staining on the kick patch that comes with it, where the beater hits the bass drum, but they also give you these spare kick patches when you buy the drums, and there's 3 of them in here. I have by no means worn through that at all. It's a pretty hefty kick patch. And even if that only lasted for 1 year, you are well stocked for at least 4 years because there's like 3 of them in here. And I'm pretty sure they'll last way more than a year for most people. Other than that, there's really no other damage or wear and tear in this drum set at all. But the caveat being, I'm not a heavy hitter, and even as a medium intensity hitter, I don't do my hardcore practice on this kit because, as I mentioned, I have acoustic drums. I have seen Efnote drums owned by heavy hitters where the cymbals are kind of cracked. The gray rubber part can kind of crack, or the rim can crack on the snare drum if you really smash your backbeats a lot. So they might not be the most durable if you are a super heavy hitter. But that said, even for those cases, as far as I'm aware, most of the time the triggers themselves are unaffected and the cymbal's working fine. It just looks like it's falling apart. So just something to bear in mind. My experience playing this kit has been thoroughly enjoyable, honestly. Efnote does say they're trying to emulate acoustic drums as closely as possible, and I think they really delivered on that in terms of the audio quality as well as the feel when playing it. One of my favorite things about this till this day is that the kick does not budge, and it's a lot more of an enjoyable playing experience rather than on a smaller tower style kick pad where the entire pad tends to wobble around when you're playing heavy kick work. I've seen some people talking about the module being limited or the touch screen being wonky, but honestly, I have had no issues with the touch screen. I think it's responsive, and I kind of like that you can poke it with a stick because it responds to pressure and not fingers. For what I use this drum set for in my teaching and practice, the module has pretty much served my needs. I don't really touch it that much except to maybe adjust some levels and trigger sensitivity settings at the start, but subsequently you don't really need to go in there and fiddle with it a lot. The one thing that I found myself missing a lot was the tap tempo function. So I would say this is one of two issues I've had with this kit during this year of using it. And the lack of tap tempo is just a little bit annoying. Again, not the end of the world. I can tap tempo on my phone metronome, but when I'm in the middle of teaching and I'm using the metronome on my e-kit for a student, I don't really want to have to stop and whip out my phone and tap the tempo there and then adjust it. The positive upside of this is that I've gotten a lot better at estimating tempos from listening and then just adjusting. So that's one thing that I felt was missing from the module. The other main issue that I've had is that the tension rods on the snare drum do tend to detune themselves and they can just like pop out and be rattling around. So I'm not a heavy hitter and I still find the tension rods coming out, especially these two over here. I think this one is the main culprit. This one does come out after a while if I don't screw it back in. So it's not really a big deal because it's really easy to screw them back, and I think it's just because the lugs are really short and shallow. Maybe I'm too used to the DW super long tension rods and lugs that take forever to tune, but these are like 2 inches tops, so they do tend to come out on the snare. It doesn't really affect anything because the trigger will still work as well, and it doesn't affect the tension that much. You still have the other 6 or 7 lugs that are in, keeping the hoop in place. So it's not really a deal breaker, but if you are someone who hits really hard, I can imagine you would want to get some lug locks. Otherwise, your tension rods are probably just going to go flying every other song, if not halfway in a song. Let me just run through the sounds on this kit for you guys, starting with the cymbals. The crash is 3-zone with a bell, same as the ride. I do like that they have crashable ride sounds, so even though you can't program a different sound to the edge, you can still use this as a second crash. But I also programmed this splash to be my second crash. That's a 2-zone trigger, just the bow and the edge. Hi-hat is as responsive as you could hope for from an electronic drum set. It does respond to your changes in foot pressure on the pedal, and the foot splash is not 100%. I did mention this on my first video as well, but if you use a stand with a slightly tighter spring and you fiddle with some of the sensitivity settings, you can get it to kind of 90%, I would say. So let me try this out without editing the video and let's see how the foot splash sounds. I feel like there's a little bit of that hiccuping sound and a bit of the closed foot chick inside, but at least it's triggering. So this one, not perfect, but everything else about the hi-hat, don't really have any complaints. Sorry, got a bit carried away there, but I think you can get the sound of the snare, toms, The cross stick trigger is super useful. And you can even do ghost notes with your fingers if that's something you want to do. So that's how sensitive the snare is. And rolls sound quite okay. Flams sound alright. So yeah, no complaints in general. Bass drum sounds like a bass drum. I don't know what else to say about that. What else am I missing? Rims for the toms. The only downside about the rims is the snare and the cross stick trigger can't fire simultaneously. I don't know if I mentioned this in the first video, but I realized it when I was playing a song that had like rim timekeeping and a snare backbeat. Like if you try to do this, like only that last snare hit came out, probably because I didn't quite have these two in sync. Yeah, so if you go slightly off, if you flam it, yes, they'll come out, but if you play them exactly at the same time, the snare trigger isn't going to come out properly. So that's one limitation. Don't try and play the cross stick like a rim this way and hit the snare at the same time. It's not going to work very well. I mentioned in my first video that the sounds on this drum set are a little bit limited, but honestly, I didn't find myself changing the presets a lot because I mainly use this for teaching as well as practicing. And it's only once in a while where I just feel like noodling on some different sounds that I would go through the different presets and find a different kind of sound to use. But for the most part, I honestly just stick to the one custom kit that I made for myself with the sounds I prefer. There's perhaps only 4 hi-hat sounds, but as long as I like one of those 4, I don't actually have a problem with it. There's 5 ride cymbal sounds, but I like one of the 5, no issues. The only thing that I felt a little bit limited by was the snare drum. There are 14 snare drum samples, but most of them are wood. There's like 6 maple samples, one of them being snares off, and then there's only 1 brass snare and 1 aluminum snare. So there's not a lot of metal snare samples in this drum module. And here's what the brass snare sounds like. It's just a little bit choked up, and this is at 0 muffling, so you can change the tuning as well as the muffling on each of the samples, but it doesn't really sound like how a wide open 14-inch brass snare would sound. Maybe it's because it's a 5-inch depth, but there isn't much variation in terms of metal snare sounds, so that's something I felt a little limited by. As far as the toms and kick go, I was quite alright with those sounds. Again, I don't gig with this kit, so it's not really a super big deal, but I do sometimes use it for demo recordings. Speaking of recordings, it's really easy to record this drum set with a multi-track recording, which means you can record each element of the kit separately. The snare is on one channel, kick is on one channel, toms on another channel, and so on. But if you just record the onboard sounds without any processing, it can sound a little bit flat. As far as Efnote is trying to emulate acoustic drums, I think they succeeded in doing that because when you do record acoustic drums, you have to do some post-processing or a lot of post-processing to get it to sit well in a mix. And that's something you will need to do if you record this kit as is. That said, if you don't really like the sounds on board this module, it's also really easy to hook it up to a VST using MIDI, and that's a virtual instrument. For example, if I go over here, I can turn on Easy Drummer, and okay, let me play the kit without it on first. Turning this on. Both the multi-track recording as well as use of MIDI and virtual instruments is done through a simple USB-C cable connection, so it's really easy to connect this drum set to your computer, and that's an option if you need more inspiring sounds or if you find this module too limited and you don't want to do a lot of post-processing on the sounds that you've recorded. Speaking of sounds, unless you're using isolating headphones or earphones while you're playing these drums, you will hear the shell tone of the kit. So let me play these with the drum sound muted for you. So basically, that is the sound of a bop kit. Bop kits are generally smaller size drums. This would be a 16-inch kick, 12-inch floor tom, 10-inch rack tom, and a 12-inch snare. The shell sizes, in combination with the sounds that are available on this kit, just give me more funky, groovy vibes. So what I mean is, firstly, the acoustic sound coming out of these shells is going to be that of a small drum. And when you hit it, the rebound that you're getting is also that of a small drum, because it literally is. So for example, when you play the snare, you're not going to get that deep digging in kind of feeling from a larger snare, even if you try and use a sample from a larger or deeper snare drum. It's still going to give you a lot of rebound because a 12-inch snare is really small and really tight. The position where your stick hits the rim for a rim shot is also further up, kind of almost in the middle of the stick. It is the middle of the stick, as opposed to maybe over here on a 14-inch snare. So all those things. Oh yes, and the bass drum, of course. The bass drum is going to feel so different from a 22-inch kick, because when you play a 22-inch kick, the beater is contacting the center of the head, but on a 16-inch kick, you're playing pretty much 3/4 up the head. It's already a 16-inch drum, which means higher tension in general, and then when you're playing closer to the edge, you have even higher tension because that's nearer to the tension rods. So all that means that you have a very bouncy bass drum. And somehow that just doesn't feel right to me if I'm trying to play metal or heavier genres of music. The whole kit just doesn't lend itself to that. And the sounds on board also don't really feel like they suit that genre. Somehow, okay, there's one here called Iron Warrior. I mean, you could, but honestly, it just feels a little bit wrong. And I don't know if it's partly psychological, because before I got this drum set, I was playing a much smaller pad bass kit, which means it's not full shell sizes. It's these thinner pads on the drum set, and it was like a 10-inch snare, 8-inch rack toms, and a 10-inch floor tom. But somehow it didn't feel as wrong. Sometimes what we play just affects how we feel about playing and what we want to play as well. And possibly this being a real kit just gives me the vibes of playing a bop kit. Whereas playing a pad-based kit was just so far removed from being a real drum set at all that it could be anything. So I wouldn't necessarily say this is a negative. It might be a positive in the direction of playing groovy music. It just feels more natural and organic to do those lighter genres of music on this kit. That was just an interesting experience that I thought I would mention to you guys. If I had the luxury of more space, it's possible that I would have sized up to get more components to this drum set or get bigger shell sizes, but as you can tell from my acoustic drums occurring in the corner of this video screen, I don't have a lot of space. My work table is really right behind me over here. Acoustic drums are right in front of me over here, and I really cannot afford to squeeze anything else into the studio. So this works for my needs. If you have more space and you play heavier genres, maybe consider getting a different model with bigger shell sizes or more pieces to the kit. For me, this works. In terms of the setup, the cymbals are on actual cymbal stands, which is fantastic for positioning, not so fantastic for floor space. So I'm not going to show you my floor like there because it's a nightmare of stands, and it took me like 5 minutes to extricate my left overhead mic stand from the mass of other stands that is happening down there. Because if I hadn't taken it out, it would be like halfway in the video frame somewhere here. So I really have space constraints. The stands don't help with the floor space issue, but as long as I'm just doing one crash and one ride, it works. The rack tom is mounted on the bass drum, and usually people would say that that means you have less flexibility for moving it around, but in my case, it helps to save a little bit of floor space. The splash is on a really weird stand though. Let me take this out and show it to you. It's on this double 90-degree kind of jointed stand, so you can't change the angle up top. And so this one I wish was a little bit longer or had an angle rotation thing over here, because where it is now, this is about, oops. So this is about the highest that it can go. Maybe I could make it about an inch higher, but that's about it. And from this angle, sometimes I accidentally hit it with the tip of my stick, which gives you this bow sound instead of the crash sound that I'm actually trying to get. This can be a bit dangerous if I go too far down. My hand is getting dangerously close to the drum rim. So I do wish that could be angled away from me so that I can just hit it more on the edge consistently. That's a little bit of a limitation for the splash mount, but if you do have the space for it, most people who want a second crash cymbal would just get another second crash cymbal. It's just that I don't have the space for it. That's been my experience playing the Efnote 5 for this past year and 4 months, and I honestly don't have complaints about it at all. I play it pretty much 5 days a week. I use it for my teaching as well as my own practice. I brought it out for a music video shoot because it looks really good. And it's just nice to have drums to play on without worrying about disturbing the rest of my household. If anything, I'm a little bit sad that the aesthetics of this beautiful drum set are a little bit wasted in my studio. For example, from the front shot I was using earlier, I can't put the camera any further back and you can't see the front of the drum set because that's the wall. Like I physically can't put the camera any further and nobody gets to see this drum set from the front view because it's up against the wall, unfortunately. I know the white sparkle wrap isn't for everyone, but I think it looks great. It matches my studio with my white desk here, and I have a gray carpet right next to it. And I think it's just such a good design decision, especially if you're like me and kind of lazy to wipe down your drums regularly because the dust is pretty much invisible on it. Please don't tell my mother I said that. I hope this has been a useful video for you, especially if you're thinking of getting an Efnote kit. And if you have any other questions about my experience with it, just leave me a comment below and I'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. Happy drumming, and I'll see you in the next one.